Hello, and welcome to the Bartow Pell Mansion Museum in Pell Bay Park in the Bronx in New York City. I'm Carly Berlin, an art and antiques dealer specializing in American classical furniture, and I'm honored to serve on the board of the Bartow Pell Mansion. I'll be your guide in this brief introduction to the mansion's main rooms. We're here in the double parlor, the principal rooms of the mansion, where the Bartow family would have entertained their guests. The space is divided in two. It's symmetrical, and each side is the mirror of the other. The purpose was to allow for separate function, such as dining in one and mingling in the other, where ladies and gentlemen could withdraw and have separate conversations of interest to each group, hence the term drawing room. They could also be combined for grand entertainments as you see them now. This is how the space would have been used in the early 1840s when the Bartow family moved here from Manhattan. But to understand the significance of these rooms, we need to step back into the ancient past. The house and its furnishings are firmly rooted in classicism, a continuation of the Enlightenment's interest in the teachings of the ancient Greek scholars and manifestation of a fascination with ancient and exotic cultures, particularly Egypt, Greece, and Rome, that had gripped the Western world in the middle of the 18th century. The first revival of interest in classical antiquities since the Renaissance was ignited by the 1738 discovery of Herculaneum and Pompeii, the lost Roman cities that had lain buried since 79 AD after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius near Naples in southern Italy. This archaeological discovery electrified the intellectual elite of Europe and attracted to Italy artists, designers, architects, and students eager to learn about the antique. The resulting focus on Roman and Greek architecture and design affected Western art, architecture, furniture, and fashion for over 100 years thereafter. That cultural phenomenon is largely responsible for the classical designs of this house and the many houses built between 1825 and the beginning of the Civil War throughout the United States. But that's not the whole story. The Bartow Pell Mansion is essentially a Palladian villa, modeled on the published designs of Andrea Palladio, the influential Italian Renaissance architect of the 16th century. Palladio had used the technical knowledge of a 1st century BC Roman architect named Vitruvius to realize his designs. Amazingly, in an event that defines the Renaissance, the very knowledge about the nuts and bolts of ancient Roman design and building that Vitruvius revealed, which had been lost for 1,500 years, had survived and been discovered in a musty monastic library in Central Europe only 100 years before Palladio was born, and was first published with illustrations shortly after his birth. What are the chances of that? Palladio, more than any other Renaissance architect, is responsible for adapting Vitruvius's classical principles for domestic use in the modern world. As a result, these parlor rooms' proportions are the perfect 2-to-3 ratio specified by Palladio. Not arbitrary, but a mathematically derived ideal. An ideal that the ancients who built the Parthenon and the Pantheon believed was sympathetic to innate human understanding. Here is a page from Palladio where he discusses ideal room proportions in mathematical terms. When you enter these rooms, you can actually feel the difference. A foundational principle of the Renaissance was the desire to understand the world from a scientific and mathematical perspective, rather than through the lens of religious teaching. But how did this classical impulse take root in America? Enlightenment thinkers like Thomas Jefferson brought the devotion to classicism to America by enshrining classical architecture at the heart of American government and education with his designs for the Virginia State House and the University of Virginia. some of America's earliest classical buildings. Jefferson and other founding fathers believed that the mere contemplation of classical beauty in sculpture and architecture promoted civic virtue. The classical style also struck a deep philosophical chord in the United States. Citizens of the new republic wanted to live as had the democratic Greeks and republican Romans. Grecian architecture, with its principles of balance, proportion, and symmetry, was a reflection of democratic values and ideals that came to symbolize purity, stability, fairness, and justice. It is not surprising, therefore, that the Bartows would create a home in the Greek Revival style and furnish it in the classical style that had been fashionable their entire lives. The beautiful carvings of the window and door casings are in the style of ancient Roman architecture, and the marble mantelpieces are virtual copies of ancient furniture excavated at Pompeii. The mahogany furniture was all made in New York City by the best cabinet makers in the late 1820s and 30s, and perfectly reflects the classical style and taste popular across the United States at that time. Please come and visit the Bartow Pell Mansion Museum, the only surviving Palladian villa in the region.